Hello, everyone. Welcome to GloVisa's Meeting Pros. I'm Kathy. Hello, Caroline.
Hello,
Very nice,
Kathy.
yeah, very nice to meet you. It's a great honor to connect with you via this online meeting and ask for your professional insights on EB5 project interview. So please, could you make a brief introduction to our audience?
Of course, it's my pleasure. And first of all, Kathy, thank you so much to you and all our friends at Globe Visa Group for inviting me. We're deeply honored, and we're very, very happy to address your audience and talk about the important deadlines and the sunset that's coming this year. My name is Carolyn Lee. I'm the principal and founding attorney of Carolyn Lee PLLC, which is a U.S. investment immigration law firm based in Ithaca, New York. And I've been very pleased and blessed, really, to enjoy over my 25 years in EB5, lots of recognition for the thousands of EB5 investor cases we have filed. So we're very familiar with both sides of the equation and how USCIS evaluates both investor petitions and EB5 projects. And I hope that adds some unique value to representation on both sides.
Okay, thank you. I think your expertise will be a huge help for our professional understanding of EB5. So let's get started with the grandfather clause, okay? Which is something that I think everyone is very focused on. And so the first question is, from a legal perspective, why does the grandfather clause stop protecting new applicants 1 year before the planned expiration on the 30th September 2026? What's the reasoning behind this 1 year gap?
That's such a good question, Kathy. Thank you so much. So I also serve as IIUSA's legislative counsel. And in that capacity, I had the honor to work on the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022 in drafting portions of it and working with Congress and the U.S. industry, EB5 industry, in passing this important legislation. This legislation, the RIA, for the first time brought in the grandfathering provisions, which we'll talk about more, I hope, in depth. But very strangely, Kathy, it does have this disconnect between when the grandfathering clause sunsets and when the rest of the program sunsets in 2027. Now, there is no good explanation for I have to also think about the fact that before 2022, we didn't have the grandfathering law. So we do look at it as, well, this is a gift that we have. And it is odd. It would be better if we had the two dates sunsetting at the same time. But it just means it's a deadline that we have to manage. There's no good explanation for why there is this disconnect.
So what is specific rights or protections does the grandfather clause actually cover?
Also, great question. So the grandfathering clause specifically says that even if in 2027 the regional center program itself sunsets, that USCIS it must continue to process 526E petitions and 829 petitions. USCIS is required to continue to process these petitions. Secondly, these petitions cannot be denied. The program has sunset, so that's an additional protection. And finally, the third specific protection is the agency cannot stop issuing visas because of the sunset.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's very valuable. The next question is, if an investor submits their petition after the 1st October 2026 and the program shuts down, right? Shuts down in 2027. So what kind of legal situation will they face?
Right.
So will we see a repeat of the 2021 scenario where cases were stuck indefinitely?
We could. So that must be said. The advocates, the industry in the US are working really, really hard. Two things. Number one, so that the program doesn't sunset in 2027, which would be great. Let's keep this going. And number two, for the grandfathering clause to be put together in terms of the expiration, the sunset, with the 2027 law. So we have one additional year for grandfathering protections, and also continue the program in 2027. So we're working really, really hard on this. But to your question, Kathy, if the program does sunset October 1, 2027, and we still have this disconnect, then what will happen to the cases filed after October 1, 2026 can follow one of several different scenarios that we have had in the past before 2022. So the first thing that could happen is USCIS could just stop working EB5 cases and not say anything, just stop working the cases. And then we just have to hope that everything is reauthorized again as soon as possible. The second thing that could happen is that USCIS could give us a little communication about what it's going to do. So for example, in the past sunsets, USCIS has said, okay, we have a sunset, and we are going to stop processing the cases, but for a reasonable time. So we're going to just put everything on hold. We're not going to deny anything. We're going to put everything on hold for a reasonable time and wait for Congress to reauthorize the program. And then we will start working the cases again. So there are variations of what could happen. And I hope that if it does happen, we'll at least have some communication so we know what the agency plans to do.
And the last question about grandfather clause is that, in your view, how likely is it that the grandfather clause gets extended after it expires?
I think it's very high. However, based on what I know, it unfortunately doesn't seem like we will have the grandfathering extension before September 30 of 2026. I was hoping that before September 30, 2026, that we would have the answer. You know, we're going to have the grandfathering extension for 1 year or maybe multiple years if we have the whole program extended. But it looks like we're not going to have the answer until after October 1. And that's because the EB5 program, the extension, the grandfathering extension, the program extension, is most likely going to be a part of a larger spending bill that Congress will consider. And those larger spending bills will likely not be passed before September 30, 2026.
Okay, thank you so much for your professional insights on the grandfather clause. And next, let's turn to the questions to the investment threshold and market trends. I think it's another area I'm sure that many investors are very focused on. Is there an industry consensus on how much the 800,000 TEA investment threshold might increase in 2027?
Right. It looks like it will be over 900,000, just a little bit over 900,000, to be adjusted to the consumer price index. And we will get the precise number because under the RIA, the agency is required to publish the new investment threshold. So before it becomes effective, we'll have a very exact number.
So for Chinese investors, the September 30th, 2026 is not only the last day of the policy protection period, but could also mark the turning point when the era of visa processing without retrogression to an end for good.
Indeed, Kathy. And frankly, if we have until the end of September before the visa backlog onsets for Chinese investors, I would be happy with that because I was expecting it in January. Our entire team was very worried in December that starting January we would begin to have visa backlog. So now this is something that we had been anticipating for some time, since 2025, because thankfully now we know, in 2015, 16, 17, we didn't have the same visibility that we do today, thanks to litigation, thanks to the agency itself being more transparent, and us as an industry knowing more. And so with all of this together, we have more data. So we can see the usage, the demand, the number of investors who have already filed their cases. So we knew that it was coming, and it may happen before September 30. We have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, sure. The September 30th is the deadline. And another question is about the quota pressure. Yeah, because based on current filing data, which reserved category you think rural or HUA is more likely to hit its cap and see retrogression first?
That's another great question, and I don't have an answer to that. Even if I did, I'm not sure that we would do anything too differently. And it's very, very difficult to predict that, even with the data that we have. And that's exactly because, first of all, data is changing every day. It's always behind. It's two things. Number one, while we have more numbers in rural, 1,000 for HUA, right? So it's double the number of HUA, but rural cases are decided much, much faster than HUA cases. So because of the long time that the HUA cases are taking, their demand is delayed. The time that it takes for them to take a visa number is multiples longer than it is for a rural case to take a visa number. But at the same time, rural has twice the quota. So it is very, very, very difficult to predict. If I had to predict, I would say rural would be first.
I think we can talk a little bit about the USCIS adjudication and the practical side of the filing, which is you very familiar with, right?
Yes, indeed.
Because I think it's something that many investors currently preparing their applicants are very concerned about.
Yeah.
So the first question is about the adjudication standards based on past experience. Does the USCIS typically adjust its scrutiny levels or like internal adjudication standards when they facing a flood of filings?
Well, they could, yes. I have seen number of different things. That is one of the challenges, I must say, of practicing in this area, is that we don't see a consistent standard over time. It's almost like the agency has a personality, or it has growth it experiences growth, and that makes it very difficult to anticipate trends. When it is experiencing high volume, what we might see is initially we've got to get through these cases.
Yeah.
And then tightening. And oops, wow, we just approved a bunch of cases and we shouldn't have. So we could actually see this tightening continue. and possibly tightening even more. I think that this restrictive trend, I do think that will continue, but I don't think it'll get much tighter. The other factor that we have to pay attention to here is very logistical, technical things like capacity. How many people does the agency have adjudicating EB5 cases? And also, what are the agency priorities? Because we know some years ago that IPO, USCIS examiners were drawn to other immigration priorities. So when that happened, the processing times for cases dramatically, that capacity went down and the processing times went up. That's something that is not related to the EB5 program or our cases or anything, but more about resource allocation within the agency. And on that note, I think that we could see something similar to that, although I have noted that the agency has increased the number of examiners for EB5 recently. It's probably at the highest number that it has ever been, which is very positive. And so as long as these adjudicators, these examiners, are not diverted to other work in terms of the processing, that times it could bode well. Of course, one thing that we might want to talk about is the new policy on priorities, on case type prioritization, which could change how USCIS allocates its resources between rural cases and other types of cases.
And the next question is about right now, rural projects get priority processing, right? But if there is a huge surge in applications before 2026, so do you think the USCIS will have enough staff and the resources to actually keep that priority promise?
Absolutely. So not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, USCIS published its formula for how, as of March 30th, as of the end of this month, it will prioritize petitions. And it said in that guidance that number one, it's going to be about, well, is this case associated with an approved 956F? So all the cases are in a line, but if you're first, but your project's 956F is not yet approved, they're going to move along. The second criterion is this case rural? And USCIS said, we will prioritize rural cases so that we are maximizing the visa usage for rural cases. So in other words, we're going to use all of the annual allocation for rural cases in a year. That's what we're going to do. First, before we get to the HUA and infrastructure cases. And do I think that we will see the same processing timeframes that we have seen before a surge? I think that that surge in demand will necessarily will slow things down. So I don't think it'll be as fast as it has been, but for sure, rural would continue to get priority over HUA.
Next question is about the funds risk. So to meet the deadline, some investors consider installment funding. Based on current case law and the USCIS policy, does filing without being fully funded carry an immediate risk or denial?
Well, I think it carries a risk. Yes, it does, based on current what we are observing and what we have seen and what has been reported that I have reviewed. There are certain things that we can say here. Number one, skeletal cases. Skeletal, which means just the form and no exhibits on the source of funds, no evidence, or very, very thin evidence on the source of funds. So skeletal, just bones, no muscle. That I think is very risky. For example, what if the investment is fully made? The 800,000 is fully made, but the documentation is short because, there are path of funds delays and we're almost there, but just a little bit short. Is that a risk? Sure. But compared with a skeletal filing, that risk could be very, very manageable, especially if we file what's missing right away, right?
Yes.
It's very, very good, very solid, worked very hard, tried very hard. We're missing a little bit. And then we catch up and we make that interfiling very quick. I would say, maybe that's a risk that's quite manageable. Then we have, more of the gray area. What about if we're making a partial funding and we have really great documents on the partial, but we have not so great documentation on the rest? Well, now we have more risk. What if we're making a partial funding, but we have great evidence on the rest? Now we have risk, yes, but a little less risk. So you see, I think there's very clear, let's not do that. Let's not do skeletal filings. But then beyond that, we have varying degrees of risk that we can manage, or we can say, you know what, this is very, very risky. And at least the client would know about it.
The last question is, considering the time it takes to put together the documents, so how far before September 30th should applicants start the process to make sure that they can successfully get the received notice for their I-526E?
As soon as possible, Kathy. I mean, you can start a case a year ago and still be working on it. So, and then some cases come together much more quickly. And in any case, especially if there's concurrent adjustment, we want to catch the visa availability too. We want to file the case before there's a backlog. So I think that, Kathy, the most important moment is the decision, yes or no, I'm going to do this or not. That decision is so important, and that should not be rushed. But once you say, yes, I'm going to do it, you got to move. You've got to do it
as possible,
as
right?
soon as possible, 100%.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Kathy, thank you so much. Nice meeting you. Thank you.
Yeah, see you
Appreciate
again.
it.